who here is familiar with the SNCF 242A1? The most powerful and sophisticated steam locomotive ever built. I'm surprised, actually. I know Matt knows one. Okay, so why has no one heard of it? Why has no one heard of the most sophisticated and powerful steam locomotive ever built? There's a clue on the screen. Huh? Yeah, it was too late. And I love to imagine these French engineers, these brilliant French engineers, working away in their engine shed, creating this fantastic creation that they were so proud of, and then wheeling it out into a world that was completely disinterested. And how often does it happen that companies create a product or a service which is perfectly designed for a world that no longer exists? And that's part of the challenge here, is that we don't pay enough attention to the context that's going on around us, and therefore we do things that aren't valuable to people anymore. So the talk that I've been doing now for about 5 years has covered these 3 megatrends of decarbonisation, digitisation and ageing. And what is the leadership response to that? How should organisations respond to that from a leadership perspective? To those 3, I think it's now valid to add another 2. Sustainability has gone from being a relatively niche area to being absolutely mainstream. Thank you, Greta. And I'm proposing that space joins it. I will make my case for space in a moment. But let's just talk about it for a moment. So it's fun to imagine, I think we like to imagine, that the abundance that we enjoy as a society is the result of our brilliance. But very largely it comes through the burning of ancient sunlight, through fossil fuels and so on. And we as a society have been addicted to the use of fossil fuels for at least 130 years. Arguably it goes back further. The first, in fact it's rather good in this hall, the first legislation for clean air in London was enacted by James I against the burning of sea coal because it was so polluting in London. What's happening now, and I'm not going to make the environmental case for decarbonisation, but the economic one, and I think this is quite obvious to people now, but the price of renewable energy sources in most parts of the world is lower than fossil fuels. We are working with a client in Belgium who they sell petrol from forecourts, and the sale of combustion engine cars in the Netherlands will be banned from 2030. So they have 9 years to completely reinvent their business model. And as a conventional business, all they were required to do was to have tankers go to forecourts, deliver petrol or diesel to cars. That was their skill. That was their skill set, was managing that and doing that reliably. And now the same management team have got to become sufficiently adaptable that they can completely transform their business. Or go out of business, that's the other choice. So decarbonisation, already well underway. Digitization, again, started quite a while ago. I was head of strategy for an internet consultancy during the dot-com boom. That was 99, 2000. At the time, we thought we were going to change the world. I think we tinkered around the edges of the entertainment industry. But that digital transformation is really happening now. And just one little example of that. Are people familiar with Google Duplex? No? OK. This is Google Duplex.
So how can I help you?
Hi, I'm calling to book a women's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd.
Sure, give me 1 second. Sure, what time are you looking for around?
At 12 p.m.
We do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15.
Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.?
Depending on what service she would like. What service is she looking for?
Just a woman's haircut for now.
Okay, we have a 10 o'clock.
10 a.m. is fine.
Okay, what's her first name?
The first name is Lisa.
Okay, perfect. So I will see Lisa at 10 o'clock on May 3rd.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Great. Have a great day. Bye.
Okay, so in case you didn't guess, the character on the left there is a robot, and that's Google Duplex. That is currently available in 40 states in the US. So if you've got a phone with a Google app on it, you can use Duplex to make appointments, to book reservations in restaurants. You can do that now. But that's not the significant bit. That's just sort of, that's gimmicky. Imagine that as call centers. Imagine what happens when that technology goes into call centers. Therefore, call centers answer the phone immediately because there's no limit on bandwidth, no limit on capacity. And a whole bunch of jobs disappear pretty quickly. But it's obviously that's only one part of it. This artificial intelligence aspect of digital, the machine learning aspect of digital, which is going to remove swathes of jobs, driving jobs, taxis, vans, trucks, are all at risk from artificial intelligence and machine learning. Other process-related jobs like accountancy, legal work, all at risk from artificial intelligence. I mean, I think there's an interesting question here, a sort of moral question around whether do you do things to protect those jobs? I mean, is that something that's a good thing to do? Or do you do something else that enables those people to do something perhaps more meaningful, perhaps more inspiring, perhaps more rewarding? Don't know the answer to that question. But I think the journey of digitization and all of this stuff is well understood. But we have to just think about how disruptive it is for our clients' businesses or for the businesses that we work with. I think actually the most disruptive of all of these megatrends is aging. This is something that we have never done before. We have no experience of it at all. The median age of Japan and Germany is already 47. The median age of the UK is 42. China is surprisingly old, 37, because of their one-child policy. The only young places left in the world are the ones around the middle. India, Africa. But what happens when Europe is an old people's home? You can buy villages in Italy or Spain for the price of a house in London because the countryside is depopulating. And I think there's when you think about the Industrial Revolution in the UK happened when the median age was 25. Facebook has a median age of 28. Apple has a median age of 31. Hewlett-Packard has a median age of 48. Now, what's the significance of that in a transforming world? If you put together the decarbonization that's going on and the digitization that's going on with the aging that's going on, these conventional organizations might have a huge requirement to transform and a population that are within 10 years of retirement. And I don't know about your experience, but my experience of leadership teams who are within 10 years of retirement is that they're not terribly interested in transforming the companies they work for. There are exceptions, of course. But it's a challenge. How do you engage an older population with that kind of transformation? Space. So I'm proposing space as a megatrend here. I think within 2 years, it's plausible that high-speed satellite internet will be globally available. What are the implications of that for telecoms companies? I still see BT driving around putting wires underground. What happens to all of that when it's cheaper and faster from space? But it's not just satellite internet. That's certainly the most imminent. There's also space mining. It's highly plausible that we'll be mining asteroids within 10 to 15 years. Not to use it on Earth, but to use it in space. Asteroids turn out to be full of metals and stuff that can be used to build things. There's also the possibility of zero-gravity manufacture. So manufacturing things or printing things that are so delicate that they can't be printed in Earth's gravity, can't be made in Earth's gravity. So medical products in particular that benefit from being made in space. And then there's also the possibility of some local colonization. What does that look like? What do moon colonies or Mars colonies look like? So I'm proposing that space becomes another megatrend. I don't know if it is yet, but I think there's a possibility that it will be. So, and then finally, in terms of those megatrends, this wonderful thing that's happening, which is that sustainability is going mainstream. The announcement late last year, that Goldman Sachs would stop investing in coal and oil-based projects, will stop lending to coal and oil-based projects. BlackRock joining the Climate 100 and committing to cutting out investments in fossil fuels and oil-based products. And just the massive growth in sustainable investment, 12 trillion. And that's one of the things that Manjula will be talking about later on today, is the investment in sustainability. And I felt we were kind of late to the party last year when we created our sustainability policy as Holos. But, you know, we all have a sustainability policy. All of our companies, all of us individually, should have our own sustainability policies. So those are 5 megatrends, and I think of them as 5 giant global experiments, 5 things we've never tried before, 5 things that we've already started and we have no idea what the outcome is. And so organizations need to think very carefully about how they lead and how they manage those businesses in order to create sustained success in that environment. One argument for what beyond post-conventional means that I think we're going to discuss today is this idea of a circular economy, one that has no waste, where everything gets recycled. And I think we want to add to that, and that's part of what Adrian's going to talk about later today. What we want to add to that is the human sustainability part of it. Because the system that we've created so far actually turns out to be far too stressful for far too many people. So we need to create a system which is both sustainable from a planetary level, from a species level, and also from a human level. What we notice is that depending on your sector, depending on where you are in the world, the rate of change has overtaken the rate at which people are capable of learning. Depending on where you were, it started in about 2000, so back there in Razorfish days. And before this time, all you needed to do, really, to be successful was to be efficient at doing something. Like the oil company I mentioned earlier. All you had to do was deliver your fuel to the zone, and if you got good at that, you could be successful. Or if you were a bank, you had to provide your banking services and be reliable. You just had to do what you said you were going to do. And the skill that is required to be reliable is the skill of management. So conventional companies prioritize management as a skill. And in fact, conventional companies, whatever they say, discourage leadership. Because leadership is fundamentally about change. And if what you're trying to do is be reliable, and people come along and try and change stuff, that makes you less reliable. So leadership is actually discouraged. Who here has shown signs of leadership in some capacity at some company and been discouraged? Yeah? Leadership is not popular in conventional organizations, whatever they say about it. But once you get into this, this post-conventional world with this VUCA environment, are people familiar with the term VUCA? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The requirement is, the skill that you require is leadership. Not just leadership. You require leadership and management. Because, of course, you've still got to keep things reliable, but you also need that skill of inspiring people to change, inspiring people to do things differently. And that's very much leadership. So I'm sure a lot of us in this room have dedicated our careers, dedicate our work to engaging people with leadership that creates change. And I want to pick up on what Mark was saying earlier about what kind of leadership do we need to create to enable sustained success in this disrupted environment. So we talk about this language of conventional to post-conventional. Conventional organizations, repeating processes, focused on reliability, very often working harder to go faster. You see people burning out because they're just trying to get more and more done in their day. Reliability is the priority, leadership's unpopular. In the post-conventional world, these post-conventional businesses are deliberately disrupting their own business model. They try to disrupt their business model before someone else does it to them. The other thing that they do is they collapse value chains. They deliberately collapse value chains. Think about what Uber has done to the taxi value chain. Do you remember those smoky little huts just outside railway stations? Yeah? Uber cut those out of the taxi value chain. Quite a good thing, really. And in that post-conventional world, leadership is essential. And to give you the example of, well, to take that a little bit further, particularly in this digital, in response to digital, we've had a long period of time where people were doing digital. They would create a website, or they would create an app, or they would digitize an existing process. Rob will be very familiar with this. What they haven't done far too many times is being digital. So they do the website, they do the apps, but they don't do the collapsing value chains. They don't do the automation, the big data, the wearables, the robotics, the artificial intelligence. They don't disrupt other sectors. If you think, I was speaking at a conference for Barclays last year, and for their business banking area, and the head of business banking there told me that their biggest threat, do you know who their biggest threat they consider to be their biggest threat these days? No, Xero. They consider Xero, which is an accounting software, to be the biggest threat to their business, the business banking in Barclays. Because Xero is being digital, and Barclays are struggling to get to that level of transformation. The sort of pioneer of post-conventional businesses, perhaps not surprisingly, is Apple. Apple have consistently been the first to disrupt their own business model. They invented the desktop computer, which they themselves disrupted with the laptop computer, which they then disrupted with the smartphone and the tablet, which they're now disrupting with wearables. But actually, they've done plenty of other disruption around that. If you look at what iTunes has done and what what they've done to photography and so on, disrupting other business models, disrupting other sectors, and disrupting their own business model over and over again. And And the other really remarkable thing is that as recently as 2011, there was only one post-conventional company in the largest 5 companies in the world. By 2016, just 5 years later, all 5 of the largest companies in the world were post-conventional. Conventional businesses will not survive at scale in a post-conventional world. On the left here, you can see this brand value. So this is by market capitalization. This is brand value. And you can see Apple and Google by 2013 already, Coca-Cola having come off the top spot here, IBM second, and they're all being overtaken. And in 2014, Amazon is not on this list. Oh, Amazon's just come on at the bottom here. And Facebook is not on the list. But the absolutely meteoric growth of those companies over these last few years. And they are post-conventional. They are disrupting other sectors, and they are the ones that will disrupt themselves. That's what they do. And any business, I mean, if we go back to the example of our oil client in Belgium, they are in that process now of disrupting their own business model. They are moving to electric car charging, e-mobility, before other people do it to them. They do have the incentive of combustion engine cars being banned from sale from 2030. So Microsoft are there in 3rd place now. Coca-Cola is still clinging on in 4th. Amazon up here in 5th. But we know how it goes. Just a sort of bit of history on this. So we're probably all far too young to remember the 1950s and the era of the industrial corporation. But I think we probably know about it, this idea of the corporation as king and people as units of production. And then in the 60s to the 80s, we had this hierarchical type of leadership. Management by objective. If we just tell people what to do, then they'll do it, and that'll be fine, which kind of works in a reliable sense. And if we think about our education system is still largely working in this space. It fundamentally seeks to create obedience, not creativity or brilliance, because people need to be told what to do. By the 90s, we got into collaborative management, this idea of servant leadership. Things got a bit better. But what we're seeing now in the post-conventional world is much more about teams and collaboration between teams. And there's a word that I'm going to use repeatedly today, which is vulnerability. Leadership and collaboration both require vulnerability. And I think vulnerability is probably the biggest obstacle to both. If we're going to lead, leadership is fundamentally about change. And change is fundamentally about doing stuff we've never done before without knowing what the outcome is going to be. Leadership requires us to inspire other people to come with us on that journey of doing something we've never done before without knowing what the outcome is going to be. That is a place of vulnerability. If we are going to get people to lead, we have to get them to be vulnerable. And equally with collaboration, if we're going to truly collaborate with other people, we have to give up something. We have to be open. We have to trust them. We have to be vulnerable. The vulnerability is the key, I think, is probably the most challenging part of this, is being vulnerable ourselves and enabling others to be vulnerable too. So, just a nice list of the differences between conventional and post-conventional. In conventional businesses, the business model is sacrosanct. Has anyone ever gone into an exec level meeting and said, we should try a different business model here? Has anyone done that? And how did it go? They hate that conversation. Whereas in post-conventional businesses, entirely new business models are exciting, interesting, valuable. In conventional businesses, obedience and conformity are important. No matter what they say, actually they prefer obedience and conformity. Whereas what we look for in post-conventional businesses is ownership and accountability. We want people to really feel that they own this project, be able to take decisions to make it happen. In the conventional businesses, reliability is the summit of ambition. The summit of ambition. That's as far as we need to go. All we need to do is be able to do what we say we're going to do. Whereas in the post-conventional, we need to be reliable and we need to be adaptable. Conventional management is the key skill. Post-conventional, we need leadership and management. Conventional, who here has spent days trying to impose vision sessions on conventional businesses? They hate them. They don't want a vision. They don't need a vision. All they want to do is be reliable. But in a post-conventional world, a vision is important. Because in a conventional business, they're not trying to go anywhere. But the post-conventional businesses are. In the conventional business, as long as people are obedient, culture isn't a priority. But in the post-conventional businesses, culture drives performance. And I'm sure we've seen this. Conventional businesses reward what gets done. In post-conventional businesses, much more about how, what and how. And this final point, conventional businesses will not survive at scale in a post-conventional world. There are some niche ones. It's like the carriage builders or the people who still make vinyl. They're still around. And post-conventional businesses are defining the post-conventional world. So we see these four organizational states, fix, reliability, ownership, and adaptability. Very often, we've come into organizations when they've been in a state of fix, where everyone's running around with their hair on fire, everyone's highly stressed, people aren't capable of really thinking or being creative or leading. And actually, at that stage, you've got to get to that place of reliability. You've got to get to that place of reliability. People can't start imagining a future beyond it whilst they're stressed. Once you've got that place of reliability, then the next stage is to move into this phase of ownership, where people feel a sense of ownership. This is where the vision bit becomes important, where people feel a sense of ownership of that vision and a real willingness and a desire for that to put the effort in and the energy in to make it happen. And then finally getting to the space of adaptability, where you can do both the reliability and the change at the same time. And just think about that for a moment. Just think about that, the tension with, because we're not talking about a different department doing innovation or doing adaptability. We're talking about the same people doing both. We're talking about people, individuals, moving seamlessly between these three skills of management, leadership, and followership. Skills, not people. When we talk about leadership, we're not talking about people, we're talking about a skill. And we're talking about a skill that is exhibited by the majority of people in the organization. So when we see stuff that needs to change in the organization, we step up and lead. Because we feel that sense of ownership, because we feel that passion, we step up and lead. When we see stuff that needs to be kept reliable, we choose to manage. We move into that space of managing the process or managing the people in order to create reliability. And when we see someone else doing something great, we follow. We don't compete. We support them. Does that make sense? Again, this is a big, in our experience at least, this is a big mind shift for leaders in organizations or senior people in organizations to see that their role, they have to move with agility between these three things and enable others to do it as well. And crucially, we're not talking about any old kind of leadership. So by far the most common style of leadership in human history is what we call boss-style leadership. Primarily motivated by status, operating at a team or organizational level, and only achieving results by stealing from the future. Boss-style leaders are popular in organizations because they achieve results, apparently quickly, but they only achieve results by stealing from the future. Not to be somewhat similar to boss-style leaders are ruler-style leaders, also primarily motivated by status, but operating at a system level rather than an organizational team level. And the difference, the rulers aren't like uber bosses, they're a different species. Rulers, the thing that distinguishes them is that they arrive at the top fully formed. They don't go up through the ranks like the rest of us. And they operate at a system level. Think about people like Donald Trump and Rupert Murdoch. Surprisingly similar to rulers are visionaries. Both rulers and visionaries are a nightmare to work with. Both rulers and visionaries arrive at the top fully formed. The difference is that rulers impoverish the future and visionaries enrich the future. Think about people like Elon Musk and Steve Jobs. Nightmare to work for, but they enrich the future, hopefully. But the sweet spot for leadership, and this is the reason for our vision, is authentic leadership. Authentic leadership creating sustained success by enabling people to be the best version of themselves most of the time, and by intentionally working on the leaders being the best version of themselves most of the time as well. If you've ever worked for anyone you considered to be a great leader, they worked at it. They didn't just happen to be a great leader. They work at being a great leader. I'll go into that in more detail in a moment, but I just want to cover these words at the bottom because these are absolutely critical and they tie in very closely to what Adrian's going to talk about later on. So we were working with a client in the Middle East and we were given a briefing, very detailed briefing, extensive detailed briefing, that these people at this client were independent. They weren't capable of being interdependent. They would tend to compete with each other. They saw life as a competition with winners and losers, and it was me and people like me against the world, which is why they had silos, and it's why they didn't collaborate with each other, and that's who they were. And so we designed a big grand program based on the fact that these people were independent. And then we got working with them. And of course they weren't independent. They were interdependent when they weren't at work. They were perfectly able to be vulnerable. They were perfectly able to be trusting. But the moment they walked into their office, that changed. Walking into the office was enough to trigger them to being lesser versions of themselves. And this map is, I think, is one of the most useful that we use. So it talks about our own personal development as we grow up, starting at a young age as small kids, operating from a self level of maturity where the world exists to serve us. Anyone who's got young children, anyone who's had experience of the terrible twos, which are badly misnamed, recognizes that. And about 2% of the adult population never mature beyond that self level. We have special names for them. They're called psychopaths and narcissists. But typically, for the other 98%, at 6 or 7, we mature to a level of dependence. And at that level, we like rules and structure. We're not terribly good at taking the initiative. We need people to provide for us. About 17% of the adult population never make it beyond that dependent level. Not typically the people that we work with, but there's about 17% of them. Typically, in our late teens, we mature to an independent level of maturity where we see the world as being competitive. It's me and people like me against the world. And typically, in our late 20s, we mature to an interdependent level. And most of the people that we work with are going to be in that interdependent space when they're at home. When they're in their football clubs or their theatre groups or with their families, most of the time they will be interdependent. But we have created organizations which trigger people. We have created organizations which trigger people to being independent. they start competing with each other. They start behaving like bosses. So when we talk about boss-style leaders, actually, the remarkable catch there is that very few of the people who show up as boss-style leaders are authentically boss-style leaders. Most of them are being triggered to behaving like that, being triggered by the culture that they're operating in or the stress that they're under. And so if you go in and you start, judging people as being boss-style leaders, as not being authentic leaders, they get very upset about it. Because it's not who they are, it's how they are. Does that make sense? So when we talk about vertical development, about helping people become more interdependent, actually it's not about taking their fundamental personality, it's about taking their situation. How can we create a situation where they aren't triggered, where they can be the best version of themselves most of the time? And this is crucial for this post-conventional world, because we need this is what comes back to this idea of radical inclusion and diversity. We need the whole version of the most diverse group of people to have the most diverse thinking and ideas. So just to contrast the boss style versus the authentic style leadership, boss-style leaders create short-term success by stealing from the future. Authentic leaders create sustained success by enabling people to be their best. And we do this at a micro level. Take a factory where a boss-style leader might want to achieve quick results, so they cut back on maintenance. Those costs don't go away. They're just stolen from the future. The value is stolen from the future. We are also doing this on a global level. The climate change is the consequence of us stealing from the future. Boss-style leaders don't, here's a catch, boss-style leaders don't recognize authentic leaders as leaders at all. All they see is weakness. So if you think about the way that Donald Trump would describe Barack Obama, it wasn't as a leader at all, it was as weak. Boss-style leaders are primarily motivated by status. Authentic leaders recognize the leadership potential in everyone. Boss-style leaders primarily motivated by status. Authentic style leaders primarily motivated by purpose. Boss-style leaders like to be in control. Authentic style leaders like to empower. You can see this. And again, remember, this isn't who they are, it's how they are. So these people are acting, they're doing all of this stuff on the left, but very few of them are authentically like that. Boss-style leaders are the ones that are really going to struggle to show vulnerability. Think about it. They're primarily motivated by status. Why would they show themselves as being vulnerable? Boss-style leaders prioritize loyalty over competence. How many times have we seen that? How many times have we seen people promoting people because they're loyal, not because they're competent? And actually really struggling with competent people, because competent people ask challenging questions. Whereas authentic style leaders prioritize character over competence. Interesting that competence isn't actually that important to either style. Competence can be learned. Character, much more difficult. Boss style leaders, low self-awareness and poor emotional regulation. So if we go back to this, of course, one of the things that enables us to stay at that place of interdependence is emotional regulation. If we know our emotions, if we're good at regulating our emotions, we can hold ourselves to being the best version of ourselves. And few people who show up as bosses are authentically bosses. And then this final bit here is the point I made earlier, that anyone who shows up as a really good leader has worked at it. I don't think it's terribly current anymore, but there used to be a bit of a debate that was, are leaders born or made? And there was quite a narrative that said leaders are born, and that is totally false. leaders, good leaders, great leaders, work at it. They study it, they take on board feedback, and they get better at it. So in this post-conventional world, in order to create sustained success, we need, the organizations we work with have to be able to show, to make people feel this sense of ownership and accountability, to be reliable and at the same time transformational. Think about that tension between reliability and transformation at the same time. To be efficient and adaptable, and to be able to create trust and to be vulnerable. Thank you. Very good. Okay. Thank you.